the Anfield Wrap, and it's lovely. We've got a win to talk about, an emphatic one at that. Liverpool have scored 10 goals across 2 home games. This show is concentrating on Liverpool 4, Newcastle United 1. I am joined by Adam Amelia, Ian Ryan and Beth Lindup from ESPN. All of them are also relieved to be talking about a Liverpool win. And we're partnering with Peloton as well, who are also the official cardio and strength partner of Liverpool Football Club. So I reckon they're relieved that we're all talking about a win as well. And they launched a new product line last year, the Cross Training Series. It's powered by Peloton IQ, which helps you train smarter and grow stronger, generating self-paced custom workouts, tracking reps and giving live form feedback. You can bring your own trainer wherever you work out. So we've got our team on the Peloton app as well. So if you search for the Anfield Wrap, and there's a group on Telegram as well where people share tips and things. John is all over it. So if you've got any issues with that, speak to John. But we're very, very pleased to be partnering with Peloton. Let's get on. Beth, Liverpool 4, Newcastle United 1. The importance of the win, I think, in the context of United and Chelsea both going and getting themselves late wins. But also, if that hadn't happened, you know, the table is now what the table is. The job for Liverpool is just emphatically, clearly what the job is. So the only way they can do that is just by every single 3 points they can get their hands on, getting them on the board. So this was a significant one.
It was, yeah. I think obviously the midweek win over Karabag was good, but it came with the caveat that it was against Karabag, who, you know, they've had a few decent results in the Champions League this season, but are a team that you would obviously expect Liverpool to beat fairly comfortably, particularly at home. So to back that up with another strong attacking performance, to have sort of Anfield on the side of the team and to be really, to have a sense of togetherness that I don't think there's been for a long while, was nice and was a real positive for Liverpool. And like you say, obviously, I was watching that Chelsea game in the press room just before we went out for the game, and you know, conceding for West Ham, conceding a late winner was obviously devastating for Liverpool as well. It was frustrating. So I think it made, like you say, the task at hand a little bit clearer, and it just means that, you know, when United managed to sneak a late winner last night or yesterday afternoon, that Liverpool at least can know that they got the job done this weekend.
We're in a battle, Ian, and I think it's time to show that. And I think, you know, Beth mentions togetherness, and it did feel as though that became part of the second half story. You know, a real warmth, I thought, lashed itself around the ground from the point at which Wirtz makes it 3-1. There was a genuine sort of sense of, all right, lads, thank God you've got some clear blue daylight between you and an opponent at Anfield. Not that we can relax. I don't think anyone ever really relaxed, because Newcastle did stay at their job to the best of their ability. But there was just, I thought, a bit of a sense of people being able to go, okay, this is here, but we are in a battle.
Yeah, I think so. I think the third goal makes a huge difference, and I think, you know, I was pleased with the game as a whole. You know, going into the match, you and I spoke on the Friday, and I felt it would be a game that had goals, and I felt it would be a contest as well. And even though it ends 4-1, there's large parts of the game where both teams can say we were on top.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, Newcastle obviously starts really well without kind of, you know, making Alisson make a load of saves. Obviously there's the goal, but
not a lot of shots.
No, but they're threatening, aren't they? They're almost kind of playing in a fashion where you think something could happen, and they are much the better team for that first 25 minutes, 30 minutes. And obviously they get the goal, but I think what really pleased me, and this is where I've had maybe a bit of a problem with Liverpool this season, is when they have gone behind, when there has been some kind of adversity, when they have been punched in the face, they've really, really struggled to deal with it. But actually this time, they've reacted in a really positive way. It was such a positive way. Now, don't get me wrong, the goals come at a really good time, and that helps. But that's football. You know, good players doing brilliant things is part of the game, and that's what you get with Wirtz and Ekitike. So getting back into the match in the way they did so soon, and then getting a second almost straight after the first, makes a massive difference. And you know, I think Beth alluded to it. The crowd felt something, and in turn, the players then felt something from the crowd, and it was that two-way thing that you often need for it to be like something that kind of works in harmony. And I thought it was a really, really enjoyable game, and credit to them for coming back the way they did. There's some really, really strong stand-up performance, which we'll probably come on to. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and as I say, much needed given the results.
It ends up with that feeling, you know, obviously Konate goes on and gets the fourth, and it being Konate obviously is the one that I think everybody wanted to see that happen for. But even that, you know, there was a little bit, I thought, from 75 to 85-ish where Liverpool maybe dropped in a little bit. Newcastle got to have a bit of a go. But even then, it didn't feel as though, and listen, I think Liverpool's third goal is the key goal in the game, because I think if that had happened at 2-1, there'd have been a sense of nerves from the crowd. I think then there was a sense of, no, we're seeing this through, we're seeing this out. And that, again, was also pleased. And I think it was the first time at Anfield for a while where I felt there was just a real sense of a form of defiance. You're just not getting anything from this today, lads, and it's sorted out now.
Yeah, you're completely right about the goal for 3-1. I also had thought for 5 minutes prior to that we'd started to look a bit ragged, and I didn't necessarily see that Newcastle flying back into it at that point, but I was starting to be concerned that it was going to have to be something that we'd sought from the bench, which has been a real problem. And so that was they were the kind of murmurings that I was having in my own mind just as Vert slots, and that was basically how the game kind of felt in total, basically up until that point, the point when Vert scored, was just as things were starting to look not good. That's when Liverpool would score, as Ian said. The goals did come at really good times. The first goal. Some goals come at the end, crown a period of good play, and sometimes it's a goal out of nothing, and then you're able to play well after that. And it was very much that. It was a moment of genius from Vert. So, I mean, I couldn't even see what he'd done, to be honest, from where we are down the other end. And there was a couple of moments in the game, especially from Vert, where I was like, I need to see that on telly. I think he's one of them players, isn't he, where you maybe need to see it again.
Well, I've always thought that about, there's the much vaunted goal Salah scores against Man City. The 21-22 goal, which is genuinely one of the all-time greatest goals I've ever seen in person. Yeah. And I failed to basically see any of its details in person.
I don't know what he's done.
You know what I mean? Yeah. I was just like, he had the ball there, then suddenly, he definitely had the ball there, then he had the ball there, and then the ball was in the back of the net. Yeah. And some great stuff's happened, I can tell.
Missing.
But yeah, genuinely, and that's the way because we both sit in the Kemlyn and the Lower Kenny, so, I think we're in a similar sort of boat. With that one, I was like, well, something good's happened over there, because everyone just went, ooh!
Yeah, but I mean, and up until that point, I thought that Liverpool had been quite poor. Newcastle had been quite good, and more than that, it was like, here is a team that seems to have an idea, and it's a team that doesn't seem to have an idea. So any time that those negative thoughts, unwelcome thoughts, maybe started to take hold a little bit for the first hour and 20 minutes or hour and 10 minutes of the game, we'd quite quickly douse them, which is good, because if this is a revival, and it's starting to feel like one to me. We've had a few false dawns, and I think you've pointed out that we might not get the revival that I'm after. Then it might constantly be false dawns, but they're not always linear, are they? So no. So I think that, as Ian says, there's a big thing to tick off there, where yes, we've seen some adversity, and heads don't drop. There isn't the panic doesn't have chance to spread through the team, and yeah, there are points there where we're a bit rubbish, and we're not what we want to see, and there's not everything's been checked off the checklist of things that have gone wrong, that we've kind of wronged all those rights, but you don't get to see that all at once, do you? So, yeah, it's a bit of a confusing time. I think I'm sort of. Really, and as I was before the game, when we've sort of talked about what we're going to do and how is he going to sort this in terms of the manager, it's still to me kind of like unclear. But at the same time, mostly people are still behind that idea that it can be turned around. And I think that's really important. Yeah, because you don't want to get into a point where you've got a fixed idea about what is going to happen, because then when things don't go that way, it becomes difficult to compute for some people, and maybe you dig your heels in. And I think it's important for everybody not to do that.
Let's not to get your heels in anywhere. No, I think that's not 100% the case. Let's start with the opening of the game. Beth, I said before about Newcastle not having a shot. I was really surprised when I looked at the data after the match that Newcastle basically do not manage to have a shot. I think until about the 18th, 19th minute, because it felt like they were very on top. I think there's something in this where, and I'm pleased this has happened, not because it's Newcastle, but I felt they were playing too much for restarts, too much for time wasting. when actually they were hurting Liverpool in open play, and they decided their best way home was this. It's this odd mix, I think, Howe ends up falling between every stool. He picks the three wingers, but then, as I say, they're actively taking time over long throws. He picks Dan Burn. Maybe he felt he had to pick Dan Burn, so maybe that's part of that. But he doesn't, he theoretically wants to squeeze the play, but Dan Burn only wants to drop. I think Newcastle ends up in that place. But in that first 20 minutes, Newcastle were on top. And I think if they'd have actually tried to be a bit more expansive, a bit more progressive, they could really have hurt Liverpool. And I think it's their shortcoming, to be honest.
Yeah, that first half an hour basically just felt like one continuous set piece, didn't it, really? And I think from the moment that Kirkes gives away a little bit of a needless corner early on, and to be fair to Kirkes, I thought he played really well broadly, but he gives away his clearance is slightly dodgy, and you sort of just think, the one thing you think when you play Newcastle, particularly after, the League Cup final where McAllister ends up marking Dan Burn, which is still one of the most odd things that I've seen on a football pitch, but you just sort of think, don't give them corners, don't give them set pieces, and Liverpool just seem to be conspiring to do that. But the fact is, I don't remember many of them being particularly dangerous, which again, you think if you're, if you know that that's a frailty of Liverpool's and you're winning so many of them and you are on top, it's another shortcoming of them that they weren't able to really make them count, because, you'd probably put your house on Liverpool conceding a set piece at that point, because they were under pressure. And ultimately, Liverpool concede with, I think it was the first shot on target.
First one on target. It's about Newcastle's third or fourth. None of them are high value.
Yeah.
Including the one that goes in the back of the net, by the way, though it's an excellent finish from Gordon. None of them are high value, but Liverpool may well say, well, this is an example of us defending well. I'm not that sure about that. I'll say again, I just don't think that Newcastle attack anywhere near as well as they should when they get around Liverpool's final third, and I think they are too happy to, as I say, fall into the set-piece trap.
Yeah, I think it, like you say, I think it was to their detriment, really. But from Liverpool's perspective, how many times has that happened this season? I'd actually like to, maybe that's something I'll do after this, is find out how many times Liverpool have conceded with the first on
transfer deadlines,
target.
Beth. You're not going to have the liberty to do that, I'm afraid.
But, again, if you're the manager, you probably are a little bit frustrated, thinking, God, give us a little bit of a break here. But at that point, Newcastle did deserve it, and it was a really good finish by Gordon.
Yeah, I think Newcastle did deserve it to a point, Ian. They'd been the better side up until the point at which Gordon scores, but I felt as though they were the better side for the first 20, and then Liverpool were beginning to assert themselves in the game, to the point that the goal almost comes against the run of play. The other thing that sort of doesn't make you feel like that is, up to the point at which he sticks in the back of the net, the best player on the pitch is Anthony Gordon. He's not going to be the best player on the pitch by the hour mark, but one of the reasons I was finding the first 25 minutes very hard to watch was that Anthony Gordon was the best player on the pitch. And I very much don't like players from Liverpool who don't play for Liverpool being the best player on the pitch. I'm very much like, why don't you play for us, in a very basic way? But genuinely, that's one of my things with Gordon whenever I watch him. I thought he was excellent whilst Newcastle were good, if that makes sense. I just think he should come and play with better players.
Yeah, listen. Yeah,
today.
I know you're a huge fan of Gordon's, and I have been, to be fair. But I think it's important to remember that was his first goal in open play for over 30 league games.
He used to play with better players, Ian.
I know, but fucking hell, Neil. Over 30 league games, his first goal from open play. I know his record in the Champions League is very good. He's 6 and 8. That was his third goal this season, but obviously the other two have been penalties. And then you're going right back to last January, the last time he scored from open play. So he had a good game. But I don't think he's kicked on as a footballer. A couple of years ago, he scored 11 league goals, and I thought, and he's about 22 then. He turns 25 later this month, and I thought, he's going to kick on here to where he's banging in 16, 17, 18 goals in the league. And it's not quite happened yet. He was 6 last season from 34. So I think he had a really good game. And I think he's a good player, but I don't think he's quite hit the heights that I thought he maybe would have got to. But there's no doubt, for 25 minutes, he's a problem. And I think Liverpool maybe weren't expecting the Newcastle lineup. A lot of people thought Bruno would come back in, having been on the bench in Paris, but he doesn't make the squad. And then he goes for Elanga. I think everyone thought Barnes and Gordon would start, but I'm thinking he'll probably go to Vissa. But he goes with Elanga. And that was a bit of a strange one. Now, although Elanga's lightning quick, but that's probably part of Eddie Howe's thinking. But he's not had a good season, Elanga. Well, there's a little bit of that in there, isn't there? I don't think Newcastle fans are having him. So he's been quite poor. Your point about Newcastle not attacking well, I don't think away from home, bar the odd game, they've attacked well all season. No. They've only won 2 league games away from home, so they've not really been attacking well. And I think because of their exploits in Paris, they're probably thinking, well, let's have a go at Liverpool. Let's not be silly, but let's have a go, put them under a bit of pressure. And we know if we get ahead, there's a good chance this version of Liverpool crumbles a little bit, because I think Eddie Howe probably knew that come the 60th, 70th minute, Newcastle legs, even though they've made 5 changes, might start to tire.
I'll come back to you on the goals then. So Gordon scores, arguably being the best player on the pitch up to that point, scores. Ekitike gets the next 2, and Ekitike, by the time the ball hits the back of the net off the next 2, I mean, this really for me is a game that is defined by moments of pairing brilliance or individual brilliance. I want to talk about the pair in a minute or two and how they're interacting with one another. But Ekitike just grabs the game, comes across the front post, which I'd argue maybe you haven't seen enough of. And then that second is just absolutely wonderful from him, and it verges on being impossible to stop.
The goals are brilliant. And as you said, we'll talk about the combination and stuff shortly, but he just gets better and better. And I like the goals because they're both very different. You know, it's more of a predator, poacher's goal, the first one, and the second one, I mean, people will have said and have said about the Torres comparison, and you totally get it. I mean, I thought when he first arrived at the club, within maybe even this first game, you could see a likeness to Torres, I think, in terms of body shape and how they move. You know, the height's quite similar as well. They've got that wiry frame about them. But like Torres, like Ekitike's willing to have it with anyone. And I used to always think the beauty of Fernando Torres when he first arrived in 2007 is that despite how he looked, and people might have looked at him and thought he might be a bit of a soft touch, but he wasn't a soft touch. He was as physical as you needed him to be, and he would go to war with anyone. And Ekitike is very much like that. There's no fear. There's absolutely zero fear. And despite being new to the league, he's adjusted incredibly quickly. And I just think, like, as a fan base, you buy into lots of things. So the work rate is there and it's getting better. The manager's referenced that. There's this kind of, you know, there's this pace, there's power, there's effort, there's desire, there's this will to win. That all comes through in his performances, and it has been there since day one. But it's just backed up by a ton of quality. And if you've got that as well, then fucking hell, you're more than halfway there in terms of getting everyone on side. And he just looks like a player who's, as I said before, he's willing to have it with the opposition, but you can just see he's willing to have it with the opposition fans as well. And there's a little bit of that in the game. And if you'd have played at the Emirates, for instance, you can imagine he'd have been one of the first ones over as soon as Martinelli even dared to put his hands on Conor Bradley. So I just think people buy into stuff like that. They buy into it massively. But as I said, when it's backed up with all the skill and all ability in the world, and by the way, if Kylian Mbappe thinks you are a superstar, then guess what? You're probably a fucking superstar. So
the finish the goal does have, Torres has been mentioned. I'll keep coming back to Mane. To me, it really made me think of Mane. I understand why people think Torres, but it's that left channel playing for Liverpool. Someone doing not even just the unlikely thing, but the early unlikely thing. For me, though, with Adam, you know, the other part of it is the attitude. It is that part of the goal comes from the attitude of, I'm just going to flick this past you and there's nothing you can do. And Henry had that as well. I think now everyone sort of has Henry in their minds as this almost statesman-like figure. Like he's like an ambassador for football in a way. Thierry Henry, when he played, he was a right bastard, and I mean that as a compliment. He was a wind-up merchant. He absolutely loved rubbing opposition faces in it, and seeing that from Ekitike as well was the business. It was almost the consummate number 9 Liverpool performance.
Yeah, you're right. I think the word for Henry, which Ekitike's got a bit of, is derisory.
Yes.
He just had a derisory face a lot. The rest of the league, whoever it was trying to mark him, opposition fans, you know, anybody that trying to get near the hem of his cape. But so I mean, it is that charisma. And he seems like one of those players where as soon as he joins, everybody's like, wow, well, like, wasn't this obvious? You know, where, you know, how has this managed to happen? You know, how is it this happened when it was so clear that he was this person? But it's the symbiosis of that, when he's joined the right club at the right time, and you can just see it. You can just see it all increasing as these things combine. And as Ian said, it's from his first game, which I'm quite harsh about forwards sometimes, but I always think I do think you kind of, what you do in your first game is, you know, it's important, and so there's all of that, and then I just think there's something about the personality that you can see with a footballer. I'm just imagining how popular he is with kids, like, you know, in kids in playgrounds.
Yeah.
The celebration against Karabakh the other night, it was just, I mean, he is a kid, isn't he, really? I mean, we're quite old now, but there's something about that kind of...
She's sound.
I'm still older than him, though, to be fair. So,
but there's something about his frame. There's something about his physicality. It's the magic of football. You know, the Torres thing comes from his running style, and he's, you know, wiry and nice looking, yet powerful and horrible. You know, these are the things that you don't really get until you watch a player live, especially if he plays for your team. If he's playing for the other team, then you probably just hate him and you're terrified of him. The little clip of him walking past the Newcastle fans just has that in spades for me, where they're just like, oh,
that was one I was thinking.
Like, oh, piss off.
The one that got me was genuinely watching Dan Burn's life pass before his eyes.
Yeah.
It was just oh God, I'm in real bother here, and just seeing that, and that's what the player offers.
Yeah, and that's twice in a week. You know, the Karabakh, I can't remember the defender's name, Medina.
Yeah,
the Ekitike shrugs off, and you know, you just think. I mean, me and Ben must have said the word superstar about 55 times the other night. We had a pint, but it's like what. When this happens and it's just increasing week on week, you know, and it gets to that thing, which was always the Suarez thing of like, I can't wait to see what he does next. I can't wait for this next game just to see what this lad does next for us.
Let's do the third, and then we'll do the pair. The third is, again, in the ground from where I was. It looked like a slow goal. It wasn't quite so slow. It looked like a little bit of a scruffy finish, and it was the absolute opposite. It is. For a ball hit at that speed, it's very odd to describe it as unstoppable, Beth. Mm-hmm. But what Florian Wirtz does at that moment, when Salah knocks it back to him, is just actually unstoppable.
Yeah, it was a great goal, and again, it's sort of, Adam mentioned there about you know, looking forward to watching Ekitike play and sort of seeing what he does next. And I think Wirtz has exactly that same quality now. And like you say, we'll get onto this a bit more when we talk about the two of them. But I think as a duo now, they're just so enjoyable to watch. And I think in a season where Liverpool haven't been particularly enjoyable to watch, that's maybe being a bit kind, they have just been just so much fun. And the quality that Wirtz has, I mean, I think we've all seen it in spades from the beginning, really. Obviously, maybe more in flashes in those early months, but I genuinely haven't been worried about him at all. You know, I think obviously you want more from him in his first couple of months in the club, but I just thought he did show enough that in the long term you thought he was going to be all right. And I think now he's playing with confidence. And I thought what was really lovely was, you know, his celebration with Mo Salah when he scores, because I think Salah looked delighted for him, looked really pleased. And you know, there's been a little bit of chat about maybe, you know, Salah maybe feeling a bit pushed out or not quite feeling that, you know, the new players are, there's maybe not been that bond there with them, and I, you know, a lot of stuff like that is rubbish. But I think, you know, there maybe is a world where Mo Salah is having to reconcile with the fact that he is maybe no longer Liverpool's superstar, in the sense that, you know, when you've got kids in the playgrounds or you've got kids getting names on the back of the shirts now, I think a lot of kids will be getting Ekitike, will be getting Wirtz, and I think, you know, Salah's, that's the sort of the mantle that Salah's held for nearly a decade. So, you know, I think there probably are moments where Mo Salah finds that a little bit hard, but I thought just, you know, seeing that link up and that celebration was really nice.
Let's do it then, Beth. Let's talk about the pair of them. I think it's just scintillating at this point. And I think the two of them just make so much sense. The extent to which that could simply be, you know, I wonder if I'm going to spend the next 8 years, and in a way I sort of hope I'm going to spend the next 8 years saying, I really love the way player X links up with Florian Wirtz, because it may well just be that he is that footballer. Yeah. He is that footballer that, in the same way that you could say that De Bruyne worked brilliantly with Haaland, you can say De Bruyne worked brilliantly with Aguero, you can say De Bruyne worked brilliantly with Gabriel Jesus. The truth of it was De Bruyne worked, and those other players, you know, were able to benefit from that in a number of ways. So it's possible it'll go that way. But at the minute, the two of them just make so much sense because of Wirtz's ability to find space, and then Ekitike's both direct and quite technical running. And what I mean by that is, you know, you get the impression it's a lot of this is, if I say coached, I don't want to seem like it's not. There's not an organic element to it, but it's smart in amongst all of this. And I think that the two of them are just, you know, when you're talking about, you know, I can't wait to go to the match and see what he's going to do next. I'm in the category of I can't wait to go and see what they're going to do next.
Yeah, I think one of Wirtz's problems in the early months at Liverpool is that he's just far more intelligent than a lot of his teammates. And I mean that in a football sense. You know, there's been moments where he's done something and something hasn't quite come off, or you just sort of feel like people aren't quite on his wavelength. And I think Ekitike is one of the few players who really is. And I think, listen, in terms of the whole team now, I think that is improving. But between the two of them in particular...
Do you think it helped that they came at the same time? And
Yeah.
had the full pre-season together and all that, and they didn't have the previous year. They didn't have any other sort of Liverpool memory. They just sort of had each other.
Yeah, I think so. And there was a great interview actually with Wirtz on the BBC with Kelly Summers before the game on Saturday, and it's a really lovely interview. And I've said a few times about Wirtz. A couple of us had a chat with him in pre-season, and the thing that really struck me from very, very, very early on is how just how sort of quiet and shy and reserved and understated he was. You know, for this player who came with this superstar tag. You know, we speak about football players being young. I mean, he's only 22, and he really did seem like a kid when you spoke to him. You know, he obviously enormously talented, but you know, still very, very young and adapting to this completely new way of living. You know, in a different country, and the interview is great. So I recommend you go and watch it. He's great, speaking about he's the youngest of 10 kids, and he spoke about at one point he used to hide behind his little sister his older sister, because he was really shy, and I think you can see that in a way, and because of that, I think the chemistry that he has with Ekitike, and that Ekitike is the complete opposite of that. He's not hiding behind anyone ever. I think that's what makes it work. And as far as Ekitike goes, I mean, I can't remember a player being sort of taken in by the Liverpool fan base in the way that he has for a really, really long time. I think he is just a superstar. I asked Arne Slot in the press conference afterwards, because he'd spoke a little bit about what he'd done on the pitch, and I said, can you just tell us a little bit about what he's like as a character? And literally as soon as I said that, he just smiled, and the press officer smiled, and I think that's sort of the impact that he's had on the club is you can't not smile when you think about him. And again, he came through the mix zone in midweek, and he's just such a character. You know, he's not quite media trained, which I think is fantastic. You know, players like that are always great, but is obviously backs it up by being enormously talented. So as a pair, they're fantastic, and the real bright spot of Liverpool season.
On the two of them, what I've been really pleased about, you'd expect it one way round, but when Ekitike's provided for Wirtz, he's looked delighted to do so, genuinely delighted, and that's why I do think the two of them are riding each other into the sunset a little bit. And maybe they have looked around the dressing room, and I don't mean this insulting to anyone, because I think a number of last season's players who were excellent last season have had difficult moments. They've either had a difficult run or difficult moments here and there. To use the man who's got the broadest shoulders, the captain of Bournemouth, as an example, you know, he won't come off that pitch feeling, you know, that it was his proudest moments playing for Liverpool. He's got the broadest shoulders, let's name him. So I do wonder, Ian, whether or not the two of them have just maybe looked around a little bit and gone, fuck it, we'll have to do this. And that's what you're seeing, and that's what we're getting, and it is a delight.
Yeah, it is an absolute delight, and as has been mentioned, you know, it's not been a great season, but them two is just kind of almost those green shoots, if you like, where you feel you can hang your hat on something. And it's interesting because obviously a lot's been made of Liverpool's business, understandably, because the squad looks unbalanced. But in terms of the new players who've come in, they're all belters. They all look good, don't they? And obviously there's the Isak stuff because he's got injured, but I think everyone knows he's a good player. Now, how Liverpool fit him in to a system or to a team that contains Hugo Ekitike is going to be the interesting thing. You know, how that develops we'll only know over time and stuff, but we all know he's a good footballer because we've all seen him enough. So, yeah, I think in terms of who they've bought, it's ticks in the boxes for most of them, to be honest. But yeah, maybe they just needed another couple to kind of, you know, buff that squad out a little bit. But in the case of Wirtz, I think most people could tell straight away he was a footballer, he was a brilliant player. But there were fans at the start of the season, you know, mates of mine who were unsure about picking him in certain games because of maybe the fact he was giving it away a little bit or the lack of physicality. But for me, I always wanted to see him start, always, because the only way he was going to adjust was A, by getting in the gym and bulking up a little bit, and he's done that, but also by playing with his teammates, playing against this kind of opposition, where he just starts to understand it and knows what it looks and feels like a little bit more. And he's absolutely accustomed to it now, where not only is the quality there and you're still seeing the flashes that you were seeing at the start of the season, but it's now all backed up by numbers. The goals are there, the assists are there. You know, his link-up play with Ekitike is phenomenal. And football's always been that way. You get good players in the vicinity of other good players. Guess what? Relationships are going to blossom. They're going to develop. It's always been that way, hasn't it? You know, whether it be Russian Dalglish, Barnes and Beardsley, Fowler McManaman, Gerrard with a number of footballers, name loads of them.
Yeah.
He had that with a ton of footballers. And these two have
almost
got
like
it.
he was brilliant.
Yeah, almost like he was brilliant. And these two are very much of that ilk where they're both supremely talented, and if you get them close to each other, they're all the best, because they are going to cause teams serious problems, and we've seen that, and you can only imagine it's going to get better and better.
The future?
Yeah, and as I say, that's the exciting thing. He's just, Wirtz is, I think, the thing that has maybe taken a while for everybody, fans and his teammates, to adjust to. He's just light as a feather. I think he's the most deft sort of playmaker I've ever seen, and you know, the Beardsley comparisons are probably a good one, because he looked a bit unusual when he first came, and it took a while for it to kind of click into gear compared to like a John Barnes. But I think now you see it there. You maybe, and I was grumbling on shows earlier on in the season about how he can't kick the ball hard, but you sort of, it all has started to slowly, and it has been quite slow really. Obviously the player's been in there, but I think it's starting to slowly make it real sense to everybody. And yeah, as we're talking about the pair, I think it was Ekitike that was onto it first of all, but you know, Salah's onto it now. There's more and more of them are coming into it, and you know, I do think he has adjusted, and he's become a bit more muscular, and but yeah, that without losing that deftness.
You see him pinging it a little bit as well. Sorry, Neil, you were going to clap there, weren't you? But like, there's even that moment where he pings it like 50 yards at the weekend. I've not really seen him do that. It's been more kind of short, sharp passing, but there was that one where he just sprays it the full length of the pitch. And as I say, I think the deftness, absolutely. Your point before, Beth, about just adjusting to his game. I think there's almost been times where players are like, I can't believe he's put it into that space. Yeah. So I haven't gone because there's no way he's getting it there. But he has. So I think now you are starting to see players just suddenly think, fucking hell, if I do get there, there's a good chance he's going to find me. So you're starting to see those relationships develop all over the pitch, not just him and Ekitike.
Okay, other individual bits from the game. Konate, the obvious one, Beth. The goal was great for him. It was great for the side. On the Ekitike point, it was interesting even after the final whistle had gone, Ekitike couldn't get on the pitch fast enough to get over and speak to him. But put the goal to one side in a way. You know, the goal means everything, and it comes with such emotional heft. He was excellent, and to me that's the most important thing. I think it's probably his best performance of the season. I think it could well be his best performance at Anfield. You know, I think he's been very good against Arsenal on those occasions, but apart from that, I think it was also the one that was the most shining light performance. It was part of driving Liverpool on, not just defending Liverpool's goal. Yeah,
he was outstanding, and the manager said, didn't he, after the game, that his plan had initially been, I think, to come back for the City game, and he'd said, no, you know, I can see the problems that we've got defensively. I want to be back in, and you did feel like at times, certainly in the second half, that he was a big part of driving Liverpool forward. Like you say, he was the one who took responsibility and led the back line, which I think is probably one of the biggest criticisms you can level at him at times, is that, you know, for a player who, of his stature, of his quality, doesn't necessarily always lead, and maybe he doesn't have to because Virgil's there a lot of the time, but I think you'd like to see that a bit more from him. So I think, yeah, it was a tremendous performance, even without the goal. And I think to be fair to him, you know, the manager makes the comment, doesn't he, after Leeds, that he's too often at the scene of the crime. And again, I think that's probably being kind, because he had been woeful at times, genuinely woeful in the first few months of the season in terms of the individual mistakes. And I think that's, again, something that's frustrating with him, because you know how good he can be. You know, we watched him be sort of he was man of the match for me in the 22 Champions League final. He was outstanding against Real Madrid, and he was only, 22 at that point. Yeah. And he's got that quality in him. And I think there's been times this season in games where he has made mistakes, where he's been great, and then he's made a mistake and it's completely altered the course of his game. And listen, maybe that's something that he's always going to carry with him. But I think since that mistake at Leeds, he has been pretty brilliant. And again, it sort of reinforces the idea of why Liverpool wanted to keep him, why they still want to keep him. Obviously, with every sort of passing week, that looks like more unlikely, but who knows?
It's funny with him, I think, Adam, where because he comes, Beth points out there, he comes at sort of the age of 21, 22. I have a funny relationship with the player. I think I've said this a couple of times on shows. I find it difficult to almost talk about him from time to time because he can be very, very frustrating. But very, very frustrating in the way that he feels really like one of ours. And I thought that sort of the aftermath, the response on Saturday around everything that we now know has been going on in his personal life, and that sort of, like, he was crying after he scored. He was crying when he was playing. They kick back off and he's in tears and he's sort of getting through for a couple of minutes there because he's finding it hard. But him having that emotional connection with the moment, with the place, it's a funny thing to say. It reminds me a little bit in a funny roundabout way of Lucas, who goes on this journey where he massively, by the end of it, you just feel like he's a Liverpool player. But in the same way, that sometimes makes you even more frustrated when he made the odd mistake. Don't dive in there. Please don't dive in there. Come on. Yeah. All that sort of stuff. And, I was just made up for him, made up that he played ever so well, made up that he gets to be as part of a winning team, and then obviously made up he gets the goal.
Yeah, you've got to be careful not to project too much because you don't really know the full facts. But he looked to be playing with a bit of a weight off to me, and we don't know the details of what's been happening in his personal life, so you sort of don't want to dwell on it too much. It was so nice to see, because the other thing, now he has returned and played well, was that I hadn't sort of been thinking, I really want him to be back, because I think that just purely in a footballing sense, that him and McAllister have been our main two problems this season in terms of players that are good, that for whatever reason have not been good, in the times when Liverpool have been poor, and it's affected us in different ways. And with Konate, it's been the spread of panic, I think, which is not just his fault, because everyone else has to panic for it to spread. Yeah. So, but I often think that he's the thing that's sparked off that panic. So, I wonder whether part of what you see is everybody, as well as obviously consoling him and congratulating him, is also right. Let's start from here. Let's turn over a new leaf in terms of how you're going to play and the part you're going to play in the team. But yeah, he does feel like one of ours. And the interesting thing, I think we've said on another few occasions, is that he doesn't seem his age. He seems like he seems younger. Seems younger. Yeah. And maybe that part of Lee, as Beth hints towards, the kind of arrested development which you must have if you play next to Virgil van Dijk. How can anybody kind of lead when you're next to this sort of god? And maybe that is part of it, but it is something which I think he is going to obviously have to work on. Every player's on their own journey, and being that sort of player, you expect more leadership and more maturity from him. So yeah, I'm really positive. It was he has a great shot just before he scores as well, doesn't he? So
yeah, it's a really good block from Baltimore.
Must have been in his mind that he wanted to score. It wasn't, obviously, it's not. It's the goal. It's the kind of goal you do see a defender score every now and again. There was nothing. There was no great sort of quality to it, but it's that's what you get. Your defenders take up those positions and get the foot on something. You see kind of Hippier and Matip score that kind of goal too. But yeah, he was sniffing around trying to notch one. So yeah, as I say, hopefully it's a new leaf.
I think it's a testament to the quality that he has, that despite the fact he has had a difficult season for the most part, like you say, I think he does feel like a Liverpool player, and he does feel like he's someone that I personally would be genuinely quite sad to see wearing another team shirt next season. And I think part of that as well comes down to his character off the pitch. And, I think he is one of the big characters. He's always got a smile on his face. There was a great video the club put out a month or so ago when he was doing something with the foundation, and it was just such a lovely video, and you see the human side of him. And again, I think when there's so much change and so obviously for obvious reasons, such a difficult period for a dressing room, you do need characters like that, and he is a great character, and I think that will almost be as difficult to replace as what he brings on the pitch as well, if indeed he does leave when his contract expires.
I think sometimes it's just good that football just does have a habit of giving you those moments where I think everyone going into the game would have been thinking, if I could pick one player who could get on the score sheet today, it's probably Konate, and he gets that moment, and it just happens to fall at the very end of the game. But no, I was made up for him, and it's been a tough season. And like Adam said, I don't know how much the family stuff and the stuff with his dad would have been going on behind the scenes. I mean, it might have been playing a part. I'm not saying it's the result of his performances, but it could have been in there for him at certain moments where it's made things even more difficult, and that kind of plays into your confidence and stuff like that. Because there's no doubt, when he's at his very best, his highs are very, very good. You know, we can often be, you know, almost 9 or 10 out of 10 player, and you think, wow, he's got everything, he's got the lot. But then there are moments, and there have been moments this season where he's nowhere near a 9 or a 10. He's more like a 3 or 4. And you're just thinking, Christ, how have you gone from that to that? Do you know what I mean? But I agree with you, Beth. You know, since Leeds, really, I'm struggling to think of many bad performances. I think he's been pretty consistent since then. You know, and he's had some really standouts this season. He was great against Real Madrid, but I thought by far his performance against Newcastle was his best of the campaign.
Okay, I want to briefly mention 3 others, but go around quite quick on them, one each. Ian, I thought Gravenberch, also arguably his best performance in a few weeks as well, as the game wore on. Yeah,
maybe even more than a few weeks. I said to you, Neil, on Friday, there's been times where as someone who loves the player and really, really likes the player and loved what he did for the most last season, there's been times where he's almost been a little bit invisible, I think, in games this season, and he's not been anywhere near his best. But I thought at the weekend he was outstanding. And when I saw the team drop, I did think to myself, Christ, this could be a busy afternoon for Gravenberch, this, because he's next to McAllister. You know, we know he's not been at his best. And I thought the manager might go for Jones and just solidify the midfield a little bit, maybe leave Gakpo out of this one. Now, the manager's proven right. Gakpo actually has a decent game, I think.
I thought he played well.
Yeah, he plays well, yeah, so fair play. But I thought Gravenberch, no, he was really, really good. And it was almost, like, when I've been disappointed in him recently, it's games where he's just not prominent at all. And you're having to check yourself that he's actually still on the pitch and he's still playing. And that might seem really harsh because, as I say, he's a footballer I really like, but there was none of that. He was so present in the football match. All the things that Liverpool were doing that were good, often he'd be at the heart of it or he'd featured somewhere. So I thought, yeah, he was really, really good. It was an outstanding performance, I thought.
Mo Salah, it's an interesting afternoon in that I don't think he plays well on the ball. I think his use of the ball is frustrating. You get to see flashes and glimpses, but it's still frustrating. Comes away with an assist. But one of the things I took from it was he still doesn't half demand a lot of opposition attention. And at some point, you know, the goals are going to come back. He's getting, what surprises me is that actually when you sit down, you can say, oh, I don't think Salah did this, I don't think Salah did this, I don't think Salah did this. But I've sort of sat and thought about the performances, the games he's been in. And I mean this as a compliment. He's missed 6 or 7 good chances. He's still around good chances, Beth, which for me is really, really important because that won't continue. Yeah. At some point, Mo Salah will start to take at least a decent proportion of the good chances that he's part of, and that, you know, I think that's the thing that Newcastle almost struggled to deal with. That he wasn't very good, but you still needed to really think about him.
Yeah, I don't think he was very good against Karabakh either. But he's come away with from those 2 games with a goal and an assist. So I mean, that sort of speaks volumes about how special he is as a player and continues to be as a player. I think, you know, his overall game, his passing at times has been a little bit frustrating, and he's looked. You know, he's looked a million miles off his best. And I think, you know, you can understand why the manager did want to drop him up for a little bit before Christmas. But I think he still does have an important role to play. And we've waxed lyrical about Ekitike and Viet. So you think, hang on a minute, you know, would they have, if Mo Salah wasn't there, you know, occupying that space and occupying the minds of defenders, would they have had the time or the space to be able to pull off some of the things that they're doing? So I think the fact that he is Mo Salah sometimes is enough. You know, he doesn't have to be brilliant. I think the fact that he is there is a real strength for Liverpool. And I think, you know, the issue that I was slightly concerned about before Christmas when we were talking about him coming back was, you know, would he buy into this team? You know, he's obviously not very, very happy with his situation, you know, with the manager, with the hierarchy, whatever. And I was sort of thinking, would he buy into what the manager wanted to do when he came back into the team? Would he feel like he still had a role to play? And I think it's clear from the past couple of weeks that he does still feel like he can contribute, and that's really important. And I think, like you say, once hopefully it doesn't have to be as prolific as he was previously, but if he can start banging in the goals a little bit more frequently, then, you know, he's still a real asset.
Kerkers ends up gets his own assist, puts it through to Ekitike. It's just another good performance in what is now becoming a run of good performances, and I think that that's worthy of reflection, because, you know, if you'd have said to me about the player, my views on the player around late September, early October, I might have said, you know what, it could end up being a bit of a patchy year. I might even have gone as far as to say it might end up being a bit of a patchy Liverpool career at times. Whereas I think it is quite reasonable to say that, you know, even whilst Liverpool haven't been at times great in the last 6 or 7 league games, I think he's been a pretty consistent 7 out of 10 at the very least.
Yeah, he might be the player that sums up this season, to be honest. I think that at times, even when he ends up playing well, he doesn't start off looking great. And you know, if you're just looking at him sort of neutrally and not trying to get on his back, there are still some things that you feel, you know, you don't want to stereotype, but he looks like a certain sort of fullback, and sometimes at the start of games he seems to just be that player, and then he snaps out of it. So he will have a lunge in. He'll look a bit not brainy, or whatever the word is, but then he seems to be able to steady himself and control that sort of aggression into a sense where it's to his and our benefit. And I do think that there's been things there which he brings which have been a positive catalyst for Liverpool.
Yeah.
I think they've been, you know, we've been down that low that we have had to rely on fight. You know, we've had to just fight our way out of things at times this season, and I think that he's never shirked, and that's what I always enjoy watching that, especially when the chips are down a bit. You just need to see a bit of fight, and that is probably to underestimate him a little bit as a footballer. You see some really nice work there, and I think his passing is good. I hope he gets a little bit more confidence again. I hope his confidence grows, because there are times where, because he doesn't naturally overlap, if he's underlapping and he's not feeling very confident, it can look a little bit like hiding. And I don't think he is hiding, and I think it's partly instruction, but sometimes the position, the tucked in position he takes, it sort of it doesn't help us, and I think it's something that we will hopefully just see more and more of to add his strings to his bow. I guess partly this is a Robertson thing, actually, because I think Robertson is still a really good attacker and he's a really good runner, and that's maybe the thing that you miss a little bit with Kirkes, who I think is certainly this season is a better defender than Robertson was last season, and probably this season too. But yeah, there's things that that you've seen recently from another player in that position that you'd like. It doesn't really make sense that he's not doing them to me. So yeah, I'd like to see a little bit more.
All right, transfers in a second. The Anfield Wrap is going on tour. We're in Ireland this week. Limerick on Wednesday, Dublin on Thursday, Derry on Friday, and Belfast on Saturday. There's tickets left for Limerick and Derry. Very, very few for Derry. If Craig Hannon's information he gave me earlier on is accurate, and there's no reason to think that it wouldn't be. And then Australia, which I'd love people to come to if they are around any of the following places, and I think this is also the correct order as well. Sydney, Melbourne, and obviously Auckland, which is not in Australia. I do know it's not in Australia. You don't need to worry, the good people of Auckland. And then I think it's the order of Brisbane, Adelaide, and it's definitely ending with Perth. I'm not 100% on between Brisbane and Adelaide yet, but I'll get there, both metaphorically and literally in this instance. So we'll be in there during the March International break. Do get your tickets for that if you are interested in coming. I forgot Album of the Week last week, which is a real issue really, because the album I was going to go for came at the end of July. The self-imposed quotients on this, it's kind of come out in the last 6 months. Okay. Adam, so the one was going to be last week of July, and I was going to just sneak it in under the radar, but I forgot to do it last week. So it's gone now, so no one's ever going to know. I might tell you afterwards, as a secret though, not as content. So we will instead have to settle into this week's, which is an album that came out very, very recently indeed. It's Vacancy by Ari Lennox. That's Ari, not Annie. A-R-I Lennox, not Annie Lennox. It's a different Lennox.
Or Harry. You're not just dropping the H.
I'm not just dropping the H.
Harry Lennox.
No, Ari Lennox. She's absolutely brilliant. I think it's her third album. I've loved all of them. I saw her live a couple of years ago in Hammersmith. Really, really enjoyed myself there. And the new album's just terrific. Just wonderful music, really well observed lyrics. I'm absolutely banging to Ari, and more power to her elbow, so definitely check out Vacancy. It's not a hard one either. You just don't need to worry, you'll all be all right with it. We haven't quite hit the stuff that you're going to find difficult yet. Maybe next week we're going to step it up a couple of levels. So this, I'm going to say anyway. It's mad to me she's not number one. That's what I'm saying. Maybe she just hasn't quite had the single yet that gets her to number one. But it's mad to me that she's not pretty much the biggest star in the world. She very much should be. So do check out Vacancy by Ari Lennox, and we'll talk about Jeremy Jacquet. Ian, and other transfer matters arise, and there was Gertruda noise. It looks as though we're recording this, it's approaching 2 p.m. It looks as though that's ebbed away into nothing. So it ends up being almost quintessentially Liverpool. Well done. There's a fantastic player on the horizon, potentially. Anyway, it looks a good signing, it looks a shrewd signing, it looks a signing that a lot of other sides in England wanted. I'm fine with all that. Liverpool need to do something at centre-back in the summer, whether Konate stays or goes. I'm fine with that. If Konate does go, they definitely need to get another one. They might need to get another one anyway.
Yeah.
That may well be the truth of it, depending on also what happens with Joe Gomez and where Leone's up to, etc., etc. But Jacquet is undoubtedly good news. The idea that Liverpool are going to go into the 2nd, 3rd, and maybe even the 4th of February, as you were, is less good news given the pressures.
Yeah. I think definitely good news on the centre half, because people who seem to know what they're talking about when analysing this footballer speak very, very highly of him. I know Julian Lawrence put something up before that basically said...
Talking to him in a bit?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah. That basically said, he's going to go on and be one hell of a footballer. So great stuff. And as I say, I've never seen him kick a ball, to be honest. I've never seen him kick a ball. But I think he's only played 28 first-team league games for Rennes. Although I do appear to follow a lot of people who must watch all of Rennes games, because people seem to be right across exactly what he's been up to for the last year or so. But in all seriousness, no, I think people who are looking at him and analysing some of this stuff, and I know people will be taking in other football matches and things of other teams, they all speak incredibly well of him, both as a passer, both as someone who is quick, can progress the ball. If he does get dragged out wide, he's comfortable in those areas. So, yeah, massive tick in the box. But your point around, have they got enough? You'd have to say no, and it's a bit disappointing. The Gertruda stuff got mentioned, and I think, again, I've not seen tons and tons of him. He hasn't played for Sunderland for a few weeks. I think the last time he started the game was when they got beat by Brentford 3-0, and he played in midfield that day. And he plays the game before against Spurs in midfield as well. So he's not been getting picked, but that always felt like a complex one to do, given the club that owns him, and he's obviously on loan at Sunderland. But you can see the sense in trying to get a footballer like that in, because he can play in multiple positions. So for a short period, I think people would have got on board with that, because it might have just covered Liverpool for certain games. But as it stands, as it looks, Neil, and we're recording this obviously earlier on in the day, it looks like they are going to go with what they've got, which does feel like a problem, given we know there's lads in there who are probably going to continue to pick up injuries.
Is the Gertruda thing almost a statement of... Failure sounds so dramatic, failure sounds like the sort of thing that people should be, dragged out and told they're never going to work in football again for, so I don't want it to mean like that. But is it almost a sign of a form of failure in terms of the squad building? Gertruda was available on loan all the way through last summer. He goes to Sunderland's last day of the window. Last day of the window is when he goes to Sunderland. It's not before. It's not like Sunderland stole a march on everyone. So the idea he's going to come in and really help the Reds out at this point feels a little bit like, well, he could have been helping the Reds out since the 1st of August. And that's what's in my head about it before you get into the reality we're about to face.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been clear all season, hasn't it, that Liverpool needed another defender, and Liverpool obviously felt that they needed another defender on account of the fact that they had literally one sat in an MRI scanner ready to come to Anfield, and he didn't. So I think, as much as the manager has spoken all season about being happy with his squad and being sort of in alignment with the hierarchy, I think he would have liked another defender. I think, we spoke obviously earlier about Konate and those errors that he was making. And one thing that I always thought was quite unfair on the manager was that people were saying, he keeps picking Konate. And it was like, he's literally not got anyone else. Like, he genuinely does not have anyone else. And so I think, that if someone had come in, I mean, obviously, Leone is a difficult one, because I genuinely do think he would have had a good season, would have played a fair amount of football had he not got injured. But
he was being signed to be a 5th choice.
Yeah.
It's worth saying that. It's worth remembering that. The plan at which they signed on the dotted line for Leone, they know they're keeping Gomez. Maybe that might have been a bit... Could be competitive between the two, don't get me wrong. But they thought they were going to go and get one more.
Yeah. So I think they didn't. That was the biggest error for me. That was the biggest failure in the summer. You know, I can understand completely why they didn't go back in for Gay this month in terms of the finances involved. But I think, you know, the error was made not getting that done earlier in the summer, and then, you know, not leaving themselves with enough time to get someone else in if the Gay deal didn't happen. They obviously felt that they had enough to go until January at the very earliest, and they haven't. I think that's backfired on them. I think that's cost Liverpool points this season. I think it could cost Liverpool more points if they don't do something in the next 5 hours, which feels increasingly unlikely. I think that at this moment in time, the Gertrude stuff makes sense in terms of...
Slam shut at 7, by the way.
7 o'clock.
Is it a 7 o'clock slam shut?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
Go to the cinema.
I know. So you'll see more action than that's happening at the AXA Training Centre, I imagine. So... But yeah, the Gertrude deal seemed to make a lot of sense when those links first came out to me, because I just think having someone who can play a number of different positions is no bad thing. And
the manager knows him.
And the manager knows him. He's got that instant trust. He's Dutch, so he'll know a number of the other players. He was in the away end for the West Ham game, I think, apparently earlier in the season. So it felt like one that made a lot of sense, but obviously did seem like it was going to be... My initial thought was, what is in it for Sunderland, necessarily? You're sort of relying on maybe a bit of goodwill from Sunderland to sort of say, well, the player's not really playing, it's Liverpool, it's his former manager, you know, maybe we give him the opportunity. Obviously, that's not, as things stand, come to fruition. I think the idea that Liverpool feel like they've got the right cover, I just don't see how that happened. I think that the manager literally sat in a press conference 2 days ago and said, we want to strengthen the squad.
Not weaken it.
Not weaken it. And they've not done that. So I think it's a disappointment. I think the manager, as much as he will probably say otherwise, will be a bit disappointed that they've not managed to get another body in. And I think it is a big risk. It's one that might end up paying off, because if Konate and Van Dijk stay fit for the entire season, then they will be the first choice centre-back partnership. They'll play most games. But it's a risk, especially with the way that the right backs have picked up injuries and Joe Gomez as well.
They're rolling the dice, aren't they, again? And I think that's where you can be a bit frustrated. I have been at times over recent years where it's almost felt like, not that they are consigning seasons to the bin, that's maybe a little bit extreme, but they are happy to kind of roll the dice a little bit on seasons and just see whether you get the bounce of the ball, whether you get the look of players staying fit, because we've already had a glimpse of what it looks like. You know, if Gomez is not available, which more often than not, that's certainly I think you've got to consider, because he's picking up even more injuries now. You know, and that will probably continue to be the case. And then when you haven't got a Konate, it is Gravenberch who's probably going to have to fill in there. And that's just, despite the things I said before, he's still one of the first names you want to see on the sheet when you're talking about who are your midfield options. We know McAllister's struggling.
Especially if Szoboszlai's having to play right back.
Absolutely, and if Szoboszlai's having to cover elsewhere, you are then just ripping out the heart of the midfield. And we know, games are often won or lost in the middle of the park, so it's always been the way. So if you're going to be going into big football matches without some of your real big hitters in the middle of the park, then it's a massive, massive problem. And that's before you get into the fact that, you know, Gravenberch, at certain times, will probably look comfortable at centre half, especially when Liverpool got loads of the ball, because he's a good footballer. But there will be times when you come under pressure, and you did get to see this, and you've seen it in certain games this season. Chelsea stands out as one where, when you're asking midfielders to go in there, they can do a great job for large chunks of the game, but there'll just be moments where they're not used to certain situations and certain positions, and they just get caught out. So you are a little bit in disbelief that they've let it go to this point where they've not managed to bring anyone on. Even if it was a loan, you'd have thought that with the scouting system they've got, could they not have got someone in? And it wouldn't have been a perfect thing. We know that. You know, Gertrude wouldn't have been perfect. We know he's probably got his limitations because he's playing where he's playing, and he's not even getting the game at the minute. But would he not have been able to do that? Because I think the thing is, and I understand why sometimes the Calvin Ramsey shouts come about, even though he probably isn't good enough, and the manager's pretty much said that. I've not seen enough of him to know either way, if I'm honest, and he won't have the fitness now. But at least when you've got specialised people in those areas where they're used to playing, there's a level of comfort there where you've seen it in the past. You thought, well, at least he's centre half. He knows where to be at all times. He might not always execute things in the right way, but he understands the position. When you're suddenly shuffling the pack to an extent where Liverpool might have to, if they get these knocks and these injuries, that's when you're starting to worry.
Yeah, I don't think it's good enough, really. I think I can imagine this summer being another one where we have a lot to do, and I just feel like...
Well, that's why Xhake's good, that it's one out the way.
Yeah, it is. And that leads back to the Januaries where we sort of seem to act as if the window's open for one day and there's only 2 players in the world that could possibly improve us, and that's the frustration. I know January it's hard to get to top teams to release their good players, and that's what we want, you know.
We have bought good players in the past in January.
I know. I said that on a show the other week, and I think you see the benefit of it if you look at Man City this season and last probably. In a sense, obviously you don't think about you think about it like this if you're a football club, but just having somebody in really does improve. It freshens the mood, and it can lead you to, you know, if you're going for a title, if you're going for a Champions League, it can lead you to the final. It can lead you to finishing first. If you're not, if you're where we are, then it can still lead you to taking great strides towards finishing in the top positions and then kicking on to next season. So, yeah, I don't know. It just feels at times like the football department is left hamstrung and left high and dry and left with gaping holes, and, you know, having to answer questions about the fact that them holes have been left by the you know, by the sporting director side of things, by the people at the top who are, you know, happy to let another one go, and, you know, let another one go by. And yeah, I don't know. I do find it disappointing, because we act as though this is new news. You know, that these holes are there. It's not. You know, they were there in the summer, again, because we left ourselves with a lot to do in the summer, because we didn't do anything, blah blah blah, the ones before. I don't know. I find it's been going on that long now that, you know, they're not even particularly coming up with excuses for it anymore. I just think it's not particularly good enough.
Okay, thank you very much indeed to Adam, to Beth, and to Ian. By the way, I'm going to be full of questions about Kachuza in the West Ham end. At the away end at West Ham, he must have had a nightmare getting away. No one knows what tube station to go to apart from Phil Gendel. Hopefully he checked in with him. Anyway, thank you very much indeed to the Hightown Hammer. Obviously, you've got to mention him with a due amount of respect. Thanks to the 3 guests here. Thanks to Milo and Andy behind the camera. That has been the Anfield Wrap this week, and thank you most of all to Liverpool for doing the decent thing, 10 goals in a week.